Welcome to episode 2 of Nothing But Net with the Sideline Live, where I'll be chatting with Conor Meany, author of Hoops Across the Ocean, and Adrian O'Sullivan, men's Irish international, where we chatted about the games against Austria and Cyprus. But first, we'll kick off the episode with Basketball Ireland World Plays of the Week. So congratulations on your new book, Conor, Hoops Across the Ocean, the rise and fall of the Irish basketball team. It's great to have you on.
Thanks, William, for having me.
So I suppose the first thing I'd say to anyone listening is, what does this book kind of tell us about the history of Irish basketball?
I guess it shows us the way that Ireland approached trying to be good internationally from kind of the 80s and 90s into the early 2000s. So like historically we were never able to really compete internationally. So in the early 80s, a group of people led by a guy called Enda Burt started recruiting Irish Americans with the hope of trying to find some big guys. Really was the goal, just to get a bit of height. And they started recruiting guys to see if they could start helping the Irish team be a little bit more competitive. And we went on this kind of journey for the next pretty much 25 years, where we went from being unable to beat anyone really to being able to compete with some of the best teams in the world. So like the level that we got to, like the best example is that in 2001 or in 2002, Germany had just come third in the World Championships, and a month after they had come third over in Indianapolis, they were in Dublin playing against Ireland with the exact same team, except for minus obviously Dirk Nowitzki, who was in the NBA at the time, and Ireland lost them by like 9 points. So that's how serious the team we were able to get to. So kind of looks at that journey of how we went down that route, but then some of the good and bad of it. So it kind of came at the expense of some of the homegrown talent being able to play for the team and stuff. So it wasn't always met with huge positivity at home either.
And what was the motivation for yourself then to write about it? Was it just something you've always wanted to do?
No, well, I guess a couple of different factors. One was that I always wanted to tell some of the stories around Irish basketball because I kind of grew up in a basketball family, and I don't think we know much about our own history. So like we know about the 80s, but that's about the extent that a lot of people know about. So I always wanted to kind of figure out a little bit more. The other part was that I grew up kind of, when I was a kid, I would have been going watching these teams. So it was a kind of out of fascination with them, not more in the sense that one of the big things that's happened in basketball over the last few years is now like kids can see NBA highlights or EuroLeague highlights like the night that it happens, the next night or whatever. You can watch live games if you want or whatever. Back then, we were so far isolated from the rest of the basketball world that we didn't have a clue what was going on. And when these guys were coming over to play in the early 90s when I was a kid, like we knew that they were good. We knew that they weren't born in Ireland, but that was kind of the extent of it. So I always wanted to figure out a little bit more of who these guys were, why they wanted to play, and what they'd kind of achieved. And then the last element that kind of led to it was just boredom. It was COVID had come along and I had nothing to do and wanted to occupy my mind a little bit. So I started out with one idea of a book of short stories around Irish basketball, and pretty early in the process, I ended up having a conversation with Enda Burt, who's one of the main people who kind of really led this, and after that conversation, I was just kind of like, okay, I have to really explore this a lot more. So yeah, that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah. So during the lockdown, one of the elements, how did you find the process then of writing? You obviously had a lot of time on your hands. Was it very difficult to actually write a book?
Yeah, well, for me, I'm not a writer, so like I'm not even a journalist. It's I've done a small amount of writing in the past, so yeah, I I guess I had worked in like content marketing and stuff, so I kind of knew the basics of how I wanted the story to be told, but it kind of evolved a lot over the time. I was fortunate that I had a couple of people who had experience writing that kind of were able to give me a bit of guidance and knew basketball, so knew what I was talking about, but were also able to kind of tell me, here, that's completely useless, avoid that sort of stuff, or whatever else it might have been. But overall, no, it's my wife would kind of say that I like there's a while at like maybe May, June of the original lockdown, where I had like Zoom interviews every night with guys in the States, and I was coming down and just like, oh, you'll never guess what I just like found out, and was kind of excited about it because I love basketball. I love Irish basketball. It fascinates me. So I every little bit I was coming in and like let my brothers and my wife know. I was like, oh, like I've also just found this out. How cool is that? And it made it a lot easier putting it all together then. And yeah, but definitely having some help in terms of editing it and kind of guiding that process a little bit was very important.
Yeah. So then in terms of research, you were reaching out to the likes of Jim Burke or like Susan Moran, or you'd like to
Yeah.
there?
So
Yeah.
yeah, so like I had a basic understanding of some of what had gone on, but not that much. And so I done like Irish newspaper archives, kind of going trawling through that, finding out as much as I possibly could. But then there's about, I think, somewhere between 60 and 70 people that like I interviewed, kind of hour, 2 hour long Zoom calls, looking at their careers, their Irish heritage, how they're brought up in Irish families, what that would kind of look like. That's like Irish players as well, like the likes of Adrian Fulton, Gareth Maguire, guys who were growing up and playing alongside these guys, and what the perception was of being there alongside guys who were doing this. So yeah, it's just kind of a mix of everything. And what was tending to happen was that I talked to one person and they'd be like, "Oh, have you talked to the next guy?" And they put me in touch. And there's also a couple of Irish American guys, Dan Callahan in particular, who and John O'Connell in particular, who they were just like, "This is amazing," and we're hunting down guys to like, "You need to set a time with Conor to have a chat with him." So like it wouldn't have been possible without guys like that.
Yeah, that's really cool that it just snowballed and probably ended up being so much bigger than it was
Yeah.
originally intended to. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely.
so without giving away too much of the book, Conor, the game against USA in '94 had a lot of all-stars: Tim Duncan, Ray Allen, Allen Iverson. Did the Irish guys understand the magnitude of the players that they were playing against at that time?
No, I don't think they fully did, to be honest. Going back to the original thing of like we were so isolated back then that we didn't like you wouldn't have seen college basketball. The guys wouldn't have known anything. So like the story of one of the players walking out on court with John O'Connell and asking him like, how should I guard Allen Iverson? And it's just like, don't worry about it, we're gonna get killed. Like it's
hilarious.
yeah, I don't think they fully understood it. It's like, but at the same time, the game you're talking about with Allen Iverson and Tim Duncan is that was the third time that Ireland had played the States. So they played them in '91 and '93 as well, and the women played them in '91 as well. Like like they played against Lisa Leslie and things. So it's just these mad experiences, but I don't think they fully kind of grasped it. And equally, it's part of my overall thinking of the whole story was that like Irish basketball is never really on the main stage itself, but we're not that far removed from the main stage really in the wider basketball world. And you see that at like underage European championships, every age group was able to say, oh, I played against this guy or whatever guy it was who, like we've all had those experiences. Like I've played against Ian Lian, who's I think the 7th pick in the NBA draft. It's just that they're the sort of stories that like Irish basketball people all have, and that's kind of what I was always kind of about, was that unless someone started putting some of these down, it would just be lost. So it's that's why I'm kind of glad that some of the stories, and they are funny. Like Alan Iverson asking, do the lads speak English, is a funny thing to happen and kind of surreal. But it's at the same time, for the Irish American guys who were there, it may have even been bigger for them than it was for the Irish players, because they had grown up watching these guys, and they knew who they were playing against. They knew how good they were. But it was kind of, it's just an interesting dynamic for them, really.
Yeah, they probably would have understood the magnitude a lot more than the guys born in Ireland.
Yeah, but like one of the good examples of it all was in 1993, Ireland played in the World University Games over in Buffalo, and there was a group of Irish Americans that had just been kind of, I don't want to say found, but like brought in just ahead of those games. And that's when Pat Burke was first kind of discovered. A guy, Alan Tomedy, who ended up playing EuroLeague, was brilliant for Ireland for a lot of years. Dan Callahan, who I mentioned earlier, who's probably the one or two of the guys are like, were there for like almost 15 years and were critical in the whole thing. And Dan Callahan is one of them. And the story goes is that Ireland played the US in Buffalo, so like on American soil, and how much it means to Irish American families, particularly like first generation or second generation immigrants from Ireland. Like Dan Callahan's father, who he runs, or he's dead now, but he used to run their family business in Massachusetts. But he was like this hardened guy who ran like mechanical business, but he's literally crying in the stands because his son is able to put on an Irish jersey. And it's kind of, for a lot of these guys, particularly their fathers, it was like connections into their fathers, because the families had left Ireland, and yet Ireland, for a lot of people of that era, was everything to them when they were growing up, and it was so important. So these guys were getting this opportunity, and there's guys like turning up at home, arriving back to the States, and like their family all taking all the gear as quickly as they possibly could, and all this sort of stuff. And it's just really nice to hear. And it's interesting because it came at the same time that just before that time in Ireland were struggling to get the homegrown players to want to play for the national team. So it's this whole thing that we were struggling to get our own players to play, and yet these guys who were coming in from the States, it meant everything to them. And yes, when people look back at it before reading this book, I think a lot of people tie in Irish Americans who just came over because it helped them get passports to play in Europe and earn more money. That's the kind of the lazy story around it, but it's actually pretty inaccurate, and that's why I wanted to explore it, really.
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because those guys contributed to the rise of basketball in Ireland, right? But then the book also follows kind of the fall, the decline. So what happened there, and how did that kind of come about then?
Yeah, so it's ultimately where the plan of bringing in Irish Americans was originally to help kind of give a boost to the Irish team and help develop homegrown Irish players so that we had some height that we could compete. And then the other part was that if our Irish players saw the standard of some of these guys and worked alongside them, that our own guys would improve and more of our guys would want to go over to the States to college and everything else. Over time, the focus of that kind of changed a little bit, and we went too far down that route. So in 2005, we played 2 European Championship games with 0 Irish developed players on the team. Like it was just it was just all American-born players. Like Pat Burke was there, but he left Ireland when he was like 2. So it had kind of gotten so far that there was almost a disconnect between the national team and then actual Irish basketball.
Yeah.
So that people were kind of already a bit disenfranchised with it, and then what ended up happening, obviously, is there was issues outside of the national team with the wider organization going into debt, and it ended up leading to the national teams being kind of scrapped in 2009. So it's to be honest, I go less into that side of stuff, but it's more of a kind of a bookend to that era overall of where they're trying to be competitive, both in men's and women's. It's important that I like the women's side of it is explored. It's less so because they had less Irish Americans, and that's very much the focus. But it looks at both of them, and it's interesting looking at it because they're going in opposite, well, not opposite, but very different approaches. Because the women's side didn't really have Irish Americans because women's professional basketball was so underdeveloped in Europe that there wasn't many Irish Americans coming over to Europe, so they couldn't find people who were willing to and eligible to play. So it kind of, going back to your question, it's kind of more a case of the fall is more a bookend that the financial collapse of the organization led to the teams being scrapped, and it's a lot of people link the two of them together, that it's kind of like, oh, we had NBA players and that's why we were in financial difficulty, which isn't really accurate, but it kind of was all happening at the same time. So it does explore that a little bit.
But do you think Ireland now as a basketball nation is, you could say, on the rise again, or kind of making its way back from that fall in 2009?
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're at a completely different stage now than we probably were for a long time. There's unfortunately a generation that were lost with the national team that around my age group, where for the majority of our 20s, there was no national team to even aspire to. So it's kind of, that wasn't a great era for Ireland. But as you said, the both men and women, the women kind of, obviously the underage teams having so much success and one core group coming through that is kind of the core of the senior women's team now is very exciting. The men's team is slightly different in that very few of the guys actually played underage together. I think Jordan and Sean played underage together, but I don't think many others did. And John Carroll didn't even never actually played underage European Championships. But there's so much talent, and there's so much talent that are over in the States. There's guys in Europe now. We've a kid who played under 16, Moby, for Ireland, I think 3 years ago, who's now last weekend he started a game in the top Czech league, and he's only, I think, 18 or 19, which is unheard of. So there's a huge amount of possibility for the national teams over the coming years. And it was interesting that the Irish American people for the last EuroBasket round was actually a brother and sister, Maura Fitzpatrick and Brian Fitzpatrick, both kind of representing Ireland. And it was interesting, there's one family kind of across both teams. So there is still one Irish American player per team, but FIBA have changed their rules so much that what we did back in 2005 and those sort of years isn't even possible to do anymore. You're not allowed to do it. You have to have, you're allowed to have one person on your team who hasn't had their passport before they turn 16. So it puts a huge amount of pressure on countries to develop their own players. And I think we're really getting into a stage now where you could envisage a team in maybe 4 or 5 years' time that is a fully professional Irish developed team, which is really exciting.
Thank you very much, Conor, for giving up your time. It's been a pleasure. Hoops Across the Ocean is available on Amazon now and paperback. Thank you very much, Conor.
Thanks a million for having me.
So, Adrian, it's fantastic to have you on for a EuroBasket recap. So, first of all, after a great win against Cyprus and then a defeat to Austria, what will you and the guys take from those two games in November going forward now to February?
Yeah. First of all, thanks very much for having me on, Aoife. Yeah. So I suppose at the beginning, if you told us we would have been 1-1 coming away from November series, we probably would have taken it. When our game in Cyprus, obviously we felt it was a big win, but coming into that series, we felt that would have been the one we could have gotten originally. Just going on their previous records, and they're in a bit of a slump at the moment, and they're kind of, there's a lot of older guys moving on and new guys coming in, and just their mix of players at the moment. And don't get me wrong, they're still quite good. But we felt going into that series, that would have been the one that we could have taken. So I suppose we started quite well over there. We had a couple of individuals in Jordan, John, and Sean in particular who were excellent, and they kind of settled us early. And then our shots fell and our confidence grew. And then just going into the Austria game, we knew it was going to be a harder game. We knew they were a different level. But look, I suppose at the end, it probably shouldn't have been as many points as it was. The difference was a bit, but that's the margin for error is very, 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 very little at international basketball, and a lot of us aren't used to playing at that level. So we're looking up at the scoreboard, and it's the middle of the third quarter, and it's like 15-16, and we're like, all right, we'll take a timeout. And usually after your team takes time, you're expected to come out, score a few points, get a couple of stops, whatever. But it just went the opposite way again. The next thing we know, it's 25, and they're just smaller, simple mistakes. I felt we got tired, and they came out again and just raised it again. And by the middle of the fourth quarter, it was done really, and we were just kind of not hoping the game was over, but we knew we couldn't crawl back and stuff. But again, at international level, they weren't worried about us. They weren't feeling sorry for us. They just kept piling on the points, So it was disappointing coming away from it at the end. Just that last taste in our mouth was a 27-point loss. And I don't think that did our whole, especially in front of the home crowd, it didn't do the whole series and the whole week together justice. Because I did feel that we performed quite well for the most part. But look, first series of the international basketball at that level again. We were obviously thrilled to get a win. And if you told us at the end of the summer when we were playing in front of no fans for the small countries that we were going to end up with a win come November at international level, at the next level again. So it's great.
Yeah. And I suppose Austria being the much more physically dominant team, I don't think the score really reflected the game because it was quite a strong Irish performance.
Yeah.
They were the only team that went unbeaten. They're at the top of the group. And what would you expect, Adrian, the lead up to February series to be like now? Are guys back with their clubs, or will the Irish training come kind of late in February?
Well, obviously everybody at the moment is back in their clubs. It's funny, like you're only just getting into it. Not just getting into it, but you're so engrossed in the Irish team stuff, and the next thing you know, like Brian Fitzpatrick went back to Ukraine, Sean is back in Cyprus, Jordan's in Iceland, Taiwo's in Iceland, I'm back in Ballincollig, like Puffin lads are in Templeogue, and it's just like it was up and we were all ready to go, and then it's just over with. So that was new for everybody as well. And coming into February, you'd hope that we're a little bit, I suppose, more ready at kind of what to expect. And just like we're playing Cyprus at home, and just because we beat them away from home doesn't mean that it's going to be a walk in the park. And yeah, you might think that it's expected now we're going to be favourites going into because we have beaten them, but they're going to come ready. I hope we shoot as well as we did when we were over there, but it's like that was a major difference with us. Every time they made a run, we made a big shot. As I said earlier, we had a couple of individuals that were on their game, and shots are falling for them. So if that doesn't happen, it's going to be a big dogfight. And then we're in Switzerland. So Switzerland, and there we don't know I don't know a whole lot about them at the moment, but I know they're probably better than Cyprus, and they're almost as good as Austria. So again, we're going to have a work cut out for them. But look, it's extremely exciting. Like it's the little bit of taste we got with one game in November in front of everybody, you know, I do think the time is now for us to be up at the level we're playing at. There's a lot of exciting players in our team. There's a lot of talented guys. So it is, you know, you're just looking forward to it, and the preparations will be, a lot of the stuff is, you know, we're still sharp because we're playing with our clubs. But we have to fly the lads in, and then we go to Switzerland together, or else we meet them there, or, you know. So
yeah, something you touched on there was the gelling of the team. So people are coming from different places. So is there an element of kind of getting everyone together and reacquainting almost every time that there's international?
With the amount of training that we did last summer, like we left no stone unturned last summer. Like our goal last summer was to win the European Championships for small countries, and like that lead up, we were training like Wednesday nights in the arena in Dublin, and people were traveling back to get to work again on Thursday morning. The same thing then back up on the Saturday, Sunday. So we were around one another so much for those couple of months that it felt natural for us to come back in together. No, there was a couple of changes. Obviously, we're missing CJ. Killeen retired. Neil Randolph was injured. So there was a couple of people that were in and out, but you still had your core 7, I think it was, 7 or 8 of us that had played with one another for 3 months straight. So there wasn't a massive change for us. It felt natural for me anyway, at least, just kind of like, I know how Jordan plays, I know how John plays, I know how Larkin plays, I know how Sean plays, you know. I felt we did miss CJ a bit, and then that little bit of physicality from, well, not a little bit, but it's probably only a little bit for the lads. the Austrians is only going to be a little bit, but I felt we missed Killeen, but that's, you know, you're not going to have the same guys every year, every game. So there wasn't a whole lot of big change, but we are quite close. And it happens naturally. Well, as soon as you get into an Irish setup, there's nothing more that you want to do than just wear the Irish jerseys, you know. So everything is more like, you're unselfish already, and you're just trying to figure out like what's the how can he play at his best while I'm playing at my best. At least that's the way it goes for me anyway. You know, sometimes people have to take a backseat, sometimes people have to move over, or, you know, like, whereas we're urging John and Sean and Larkin like to step forward more, whereas like maybe me and Ro, we take a step back without stepping too far back. We're still trying, you know, they're still persuading us to be aggressive and everything, but just with what the level that the lads are playing at the moment, what they're used to every day, they're just like, you're our leaders, and we're there to back you up then. But if, you know, if things aren't going right for them, that we're going to slot right into it. And I think without, it's like unspoken, but that's naturally how I felt anyway, that there wasn't much change from the summer. And then, you know, the credit needs to go to people like Brian and Taiwo, who came in and had a great series each, and they weren't with us previous. So, but at the end of the day, look, basketball is basketball, you know. So it's just like you run your stuff, and they get, you know, they're high level players, they're smart, so they just fell right in with us.
Yeah. So you just put the trust in your fellow Irishman to do the job.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. Yeah. And in fairness to the coaching staff, like, between Fulty and Puff and Mark, they do, and even Mike, like, they do a lot of stuff with us where they just want us to be oozing with confidence all the time, you know. And I think they do a really good job of that, where just nobody's left uncomfortable. Their man management skills are incredible. Some people deal with different things on the road differently to others, and they know what way people tick, if that makes sense. So like, Larkin will need something, I'll need something else, Sean will need something else, and it helps us just to kind of gel together and come together. And they do a really, really good job. It's not just the players that get along with one another. Like Fulty and Puff are incredible at helping one another, just get the best out of one another, you know. So I think that does help us a lot as well.
Yeah, and you can see that, I mean, in the Austria game, like the level of like commitment that everyone has to the team, and like the mood and the vibe seem to be good despite the loss. So will you guys kind of analyze that loss and say, okay, what could we have done better? Will we bring these things? Like, how can we, when a team starts to get the momentum, how can we kind of combat that, or, you know, take a time out?
Yeah, like it was. So we spoke about it afterwards, but you're speaking about it afterwards in the change room after the loss, and then you're getting in the car and I'm going back to Cork, and some of the lads are going to Belfast, and as I said, some of the lads are going back into Europe, and you're like, we want to play again tomorrow to try and fix what just happened, but we're not getting together now again until February. So that's very new for us. But look, I suppose the bottom line is when you're playing in Ireland with the Irish jersey, and there's whatever it was with COVID and stuff, there's probably about 1,000 people there. Like there's literally nothing better. So you want to do, and you feel that when you're playing. So whether you're down 20 or down 5, there's so many people that want to be in your position. You can't fold, you can't fall over. It's just not. First off, I don't think it's in Irish people to fall over anyway, but when you're wearing an Irish jersey, it's the last thing you ever want to do. So whether you play 2 minutes, and that's said in the dressing room, when you play 2 minutes or you play 32 minutes, whatever the case may be, you're giving it absolutely everything. And whether we're up 20, down 20, you just have to keep taking over. It's next possession all the time. And like, because when you come away from it, you don't want to have any regrets, because it's a team that everybody wants to make. So you don't know how long, like, your basketball career is short anyway. I'm probably going too far with it now, but your basketball career is short anyway. The international career is even shorter. So, and then the amount of times that we ever get to play in the arena together is so minimal. So you don't want to have that element of regret that, oh, we should have done this, we should have that. So we're just giving it literally everything. And why would you not? That's where it's the most enjoyable part of basketball, is when you're playing together and you're, everybody's committed to the same, everybody's on the same page, everybody's committed to the same goal. And look, obviously that didn't work out for us, but you just have to turn around the next day and kind of, as you said, like, make changes, make tweaks, and hopefully when we go to Austria and we play the same team we just played, that we don't make the same mistakes when we come out of a timeout. That we don't go from looking to be putting a couple of points on the board to going down eight more points, and then just getting used to the physicality. We know what to expect in terms of their length, and it's just smaller things, like when you're in the Super League, or Kyle's playing the National League, like and it's no offense to the people that we're playing against, it's just when you're driving to the basket, most of the time you can take off 1 foot, because you're either more athletic or you're longer than a lot of the guys that we're playing against. It's just not the case when you go to international basketball. It's just so different. There's people with 7 foot wingspans just waiting for you at the rim, and just like, I made that mistake a couple of times myself, and it's like, this isn't playing against the guys that you're used to playing against, so those are smaller individual tweaks that we need to make, and then I'm sure just as much as I learned, the coaching staff is learning as well. That's what people need to understand. Like, they haven't coached at that level in a long time, just like we haven't played, so they're learning as well. So the whole thing is a learning process, but it's just how much can you learn on the move, and so quick in a short period of time, and try to make adjustments. But I felt like we did that in Cyprus, and we tried to do it in Dublin, but Austria were just that much better. So you try and combat what they're doing, but they'll come again with something else just because they're playing at such a high level.
And then looking ahead then to February, you have Austria and Cyprus. Cyprus is going to be at home, so you're going to have that home momentum. So what's it like, or what can you do as a team when you're playing away to kind of, get in the zone? You don't have fans traveling with you. Is there anything that you can, just get behind the guys, I suppose?
Just kind of just sticking to our basics, really, I suppose. Not getting too engrossed in, like, oh, we're not at home, where our backs are against the wall, or like, the way we went out when we played in Cyprus, we were just like, look, it's just us. It's just us together. We're here. We went over early. We went on the Monday. We didn't play till the Thursday. So we were together, and we had our surroundings quite early, which was great. I do feel that helped. Sometimes when you arrive like the day before, when you get one training, one shoot around, you're still kind of new to everything. So if we can do that again in our next trips, that'll probably help us. But you just don't want to think of the bigger picture too much. You try and be selfish, if that's not the right word, but you make it about us. You don't make it about not being there with your fans. The baskets are different, the weather is different, whatever. You just have to, we're staying in a hotel or whatever, you make it about the guy that's next to you, and you just try and help one another, and you have to be very aware of who you're playing with in order to, like, so I played with a couple of them, most of them a lot at this stage, and they know how I tick or how they, and I know how they tick. So you're just trying to help one another all the time. I suppose being unselfish with your teammates, but then being selfish as a team, like just making it about us, making it like you don't want any extracurricular activities to be getting in the way because you're not at home, so it is uncomfortable. But yeah, I suppose just being together, really sticking together, looking at the next guy up, having a next man mentality, that really does help when you're on the road. And just using people's experiences as well, like again, John and Jordan are two of our leaders. They've played away from home for so long now. They're just like the next gym doesn't phase them, and they kind of lead from the front. Sean is the same. Nothing really phases Sean, to be honest. It's mad. He just steps into the next gym and he shoots it just as well in that gym as he did in the other gyms he's played in all over the world. So you just kind of follow their lead, and like Larkin is brilliant. He just plays, it's just like, no, I don't know, does he not think, or does he just totally fearless, or I don't know what it is, but like and I'd be one of those players that probably overanalyzes things, as you can probably hear from the way I'm answering some of your questions. But you just like, for me, I just slot in behind them and help them tick and give them what they need. And then they do the same thing for me. And again, as I said, I'm kind of repeating myself, but you just don't worry about the other stuff that's there. It's only the 13 players and a couple of the coaching staff. And that's what it's about. It's just the people that you've done it with behind all closed doors, when everyone's like, I'm excited for the Irish match, but they have no idea what we're doing in training. And so you do it for that then,
So the focus is taken off the atmosphere of the arena.
Exactly. You're just looking at the job that's in hand and the smaller details and stuff that you've worked on. Now that's actually harder to do sometimes when you are at home and you're looking around, you're like, oh, I wonder where he is, I wonder where she is, geez, there's loads of people here. But you just get out on the court early and you get that over with, and then you're ready to go again. But it is one of the best feelings ever as a basketball player to be playing on home soil. Like, there's no question. It's great.
Yeah. And then to wrap up, Adrian, do you have yourself any like ritual that you go through, whether you're playing in Tala or in Ballincollig or abroad, that you have to go through every time?
Not as much anymore. I like to just have regular conversations, but like non-basketball conversations when I'm in the dressing room with the lads, because sometimes I'm an awful overthinker, so I'll be trying to like play the game in my head too much before the game is even started. But it's like, you've done all the training now, so it's just, you just have to go out and play, instead of saying, oh, if this happens, I must do that, or if they do this, we must do this. But it's more like, I've kind of learned now as I've gone on, especially like when I was in Spain and Germany, you just, your training is done and you just, I need to relax more, just have casual conversations with people. And, it's been like when I was playing with Demons a couple of years ago, I used to just like analyze the whole game for a 3-hour car journey to Dublin. Like, that's going to be no good to no one, so, but no, so I don't really have any specific game day rituals anymore, other than just wanting to talk random stuff about, I'd like to talk soccer or football or whatever, and then as soon as our coach comes in and he's like, all right, get ready to go, I just feel more relaxed then, whereas if I think about it too much too soon, I could be totally over analyzing everything by the time the game comes around and I'm almost exhausted, and I learned that the hard way. But no, so like, long story short, no, I don't really have any specific rituals that I need to do before we play.
More just like stopping yourself from becoming
exactly, and just casual conversations with my teammates, and then just having a relaxed mentality in the dressing room with them, and just making sure then that they're okay then as well. I suppose I'm like that off the court anyway. When other people are okay around me, I feel like I'm, I like to be that happy-go-lucky in the change room as best I can, just because I know it relaxes me. But that would be it really. Like, I don't have to wear like a certain pair of shoes or a pair of socks or
no lucky socks.
No.
Well, thank you very much, Adrian. Wishing you all the best with Ballincollig and Ireland, of course, in February as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much for everything.
Thanks, Adrian.